Episode 75, Revelations and Rival Prophets. Welcome to the Hidden and Distorted History of the Church series, where we will be looking at the historical aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons. In this series, I will try and inform those unaware of the true facts of Mormon history. Recap. Last week, Brigham Young and other church leaders faced federal indictments for counterfeiting, prompting a clever escape stunt involving William Miller. Samuel Brannan warned Young that the U.S. government planned to disarm the Saints with troops stationed near Nauvoo, accelerating the decision to leave. The secretive Council of 50 met to finalize plans for what became the Great Mormon Migration. Meanwhile, Zina Smith married Brigham Young for life, but remained sealed to Joseph Smith for eternity. The Nauvoo temple closed as tensions peak, and on February 15th, Brigham Young led the first group out of Nauvoo into Iowa Territory. This week, Apostle John E. Page leaves the church over tithing disputes, while Lucy Mack Smith publicly supported James Strang's leadership claim, or does she, deepening divisions. Brigham Young sent Henry Jacobs on a mission to England and began living with Plural wife Zina Huntington. Young issues a revelation organizing the westward migration. Former Apostle William McLellin forms a breakaway church, Parley P. Pratt made the first public statement linking priesthood denial to race. Whitmer joined a rival faction as prophet in September. By mid-1847, none of the original Book of Mormon witnesses remained with Young's church. On July 24th, Young entered the Salt Lake Valley, beginning Mormon settlement in the West. Part 1. The spring of 1846. On April 6, 1846, Apostle John E. Page formally left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in protest over what he described as an unjust and mandatory tax. Although Page, as an apostle, was technically exempt from the tithing requirement, he objected to the way church leaders were enforcing it on ordinary members, many of whom, according to his account, paid their tithes at the expense of basic necessities like food and clothing. His resignation came during a period of deep internal turmoil, just months after the majority of Latter-day Saints had begun their westward exodus from Nauvoo. Page's departure was not simply a personal falling out. It reflected broader dissent over Brigham Young's leadership style and financial policies, as well as lingering disputes within the Quorum of the 12. Contemporary historical records outside LDS-produced narratives confirm that Page became openly critical of church leadership's handling of both temporal and spiritual matters, framing the tithing policy as exploitative rather than voluntary. His exit marked one of several high-profile defections in the mid-1840s that underscored fractures in the post-Joseph Smith church hierarchy. On May 11, 1846, Lucy Mack Smith, mother of Joseph Smith, was reported to have written a letter publicly supporting James Strang's claim to succeed her son as leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Strang, who produced a letter he claimed was from Joseph Smith, designating him as successor, attracted significant followers during the turbulent months following the Mormon exodus from Nauvoo. This letter, published by Strang's followers, was reportedly signed by Lucy and other Smith family members, marking a collective defection from Brigham Young's leadership. By this time, every surviving Smith family member, along with every living Book of Mormon witness except Oliver Cowdery, had aligned with Strang, dealing a symbolic blow to Young's authority and illustrating the deep fractures and bloodline loyalties fueling early Latter-day Saint factionalism. Anderson, Lucy's Book, 2001. The manuscript commonly known as Lucy's Book is based on a fair copy, a term used in manuscript studies to denote a clean, carefully prepared, and finalized version of a text, as opposed to rough drafts or fragmentary notes. This fair copy serves as one of the most reliable surviving records of Lucy Mack Smith's history and the family's views during the succession crisis. Years later, Joseph Smith's sister Catherine Smith Salisbury issued a statement in 1886 denying that she or her family had ever endorsed Strang. Responding to inquiries about a certificate of support found in Strangite publications, she wrote, "I now in truth declare that I never signed my name to such certificate or document, neither did I give my consent for anyone to sign it. I never knew anything about Strang or his work, nor heard of him for several years after I left Nauvoo. I do not believe that my mother, Lucy Smith, or my sisters, Lucy Milliken and Sophronia McClary, signed any such certificate. Fair, citing Catherine Smith Salisbury, 1886. Historians such as D. Michael Quinn and Roger Van Noord emphasize that this denial came decades after 1846, well after Young's faction had solidified control and Strang's movement had waned. Surviving contemporary evidence, including Strangite newspapers and the fair copy of Lucy's book, demonstrates that Lucy, William Smith, and other immediate family members actively supported Strang's church during the Nauvoo Exodus. William Smith even received a prominent position within Strang's organization, Anderson, Lucy's book. Catherine's later denial is best understood as a retrospective reframing, common among those who reconciled with the Utah Church or wished to distance themselves from rival factions. Her statements reflect belief rather than factual certainty and stand in contrast to the absence of any family member, aside from her, disputing the letter's authenticity or the family's support for Strang, Anderson, Lucy's book. William Smith's open alignment with Strang before his excommunication confirms the Smith family's early support of the breakaway movement. Lucy Mack Smith never publicly rejected Strang's leadership, and the silence of other family members regarding the letter's validity is telling, underscoring the weight of familial and prophetic loyalty in the succession crisis. Despite skepticism from some modern scholars and apologetic defenses, Strang's followers regarded the letter as authentic and divinely inspired. It remains one of the most contested artifacts of the chaotic period following Joseph Smith's death, and exemplifies the fracturing of the early Latter-day Saint movement along familial and ideological lines. In May 1846, amid the chaotic and pressured conditions following the forced exodus from Nauvoo, Brigham Young appointed Henry Jacobs as a missionary to England. This mission was part of the broader effort by the Latter-day Saints to gather converts and raise support abroad during a period of intense displacement. At the same time, Brigham Young began living with Zina Huntington, who was one of his plural wives, a practice common among early LDS leaders, but viewed as highly controversial both then and now. Young's personal life at this time reflected the complexities and tensions surrounding polygamy, which was practiced secretly by church leadership before becoming publicly acknowledged years later. This period marks a transition as the church leadership was consolidating power and preparing for the trek westward, while simultaneously expanding their missionary reach overseas. Part 2. The Prophet's Command, the Dissenters' Claim. On January 14, 1847, Brigham Young dictated a revelation that would become the only one under his name to be canonized in LDS scripture. Later published in Doctrine and Covenants, section 136, it outlined both the spiritual and logistical framework for the Mormon migration west. The document instructed the saints to organize into companies, appoint captains, gather necessary supplies, and maintain obedience and unity during the journey. While framed as divine instruction, it functioned as a practical directive for moving a large, closely controlled religious community over thousands of miles into territory beyond U.S. jurisdiction at the time. This revelation came after nearly 3 years of turbulence in Nauvoo, Illinois, marked by repeated clashes between Mormon leadership and surrounding communities. Those conflicts were fueled by Joseph Smith's theocratic political control of Nauvoo, the use of city authority to shield him from multiple state and federal arrest warrants, and the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor Press in June 1844, an act that violated freedom of the press and directly triggered his arrest and subsequent death. Brigham Young, having consolidated power after Smith's death, oversaw the organization of the move west well before the later 1846 Battle of Nauvoo. The migration was not a sudden flight caused solely by external aggression, but the outcome of escalating hostilities in which Mormon leadership played a central role. From a historical standpoint, the January 14, 1847 revelation is as much a political and administrative tool as it is a religious document. It codified Young's authority in scriptural form, reinforced the chain of command, and set the tone for a highly regimented migration. The text reflects the dual priorities of survival in an unforgiving environment and maintaining tight centralized control over a population in transition. It stands as a primary source for understanding how Brigham Young fused governance and theology to direct a mass relocation that would define the next era of Mormon history. On February 13, 1847, former LDS apostle William E. McLellin organized a new church body in Kirtland, Ohio, on behalf of David Whitmer, one of the three witnesses to the Book of Mormon. McLellin had been excommunicated from the LDS Church in 1838 after clashing with Joseph Smith over doctrinal and leadership issues. Following Smith's death in 1844, McLellin rejected Brigham Young's leadership and the legitimacy of the 12 Apostles' succession, viewing them as having usurped authority. He turned instead to Whitmer, who had been estranged from the main body of the Church since the late 1830s, but still claimed to hold the proper prophetic and presidential authority as the last surviving member of the original First Presidency, appointed by Joseph Smith. The organization McLellin initiated on Whitmer's behalf was part of the wider succession crisis period in Mormon history, when multiple leaders and factions claimed to be the rightful continuation of the church Smith founded. McLellin saw Whitmer as the lawful successor based on early church governance patterns, and sought to restore what he considered the original doctrines and structure of the faith, stripped of Nauvoo-era innovations such as plural marriage and theocratic politics. Whitmer himself did not initially travel to Kirtland to lead the group, but he allowed McLellin to act in his name. Although the February 1847 reorganization attracted some interest from Latter-day Saint dissenters and those disillusioned with Brigham Young, the movement remained small and short-lived. Whitmer eventually issued public statements reaffirming his testimony of the Book of Mormon while rejecting the claims of Brigham Young and other rival leaders, but he never regained a large following. McLellin's effort is significant to historians as an example of the splintering and ideological realignment that occurred in the years immediately after Joseph Smith's death, illustrating the contested nature of prophetic authority within the early Mormon movement. Part 3. Curses, Schisms, and the Valley. On April 25, 1847, LDS apostle Parley P. Pratt made a statement asserting that a black man with the blood of Ham in him was cursed as regards the priesthood. This is the earliest known public record linking the denial of priesthood authority in the LDS movement to racial lineage, specifically invoking the biblical curse of Ham narrative, a common 19th century justification for racial discrimination in American religious and political thought. While later LDS leaders would claim the priesthood restriction originated with Joseph Smith, no contemporary evidence confirms Smith implementing such a ban during his lifetime, and historical records show that at least two black men, Elijah Abel and Q. Walker Lewis, were ordained to the priesthood under Smith's leadership. Pratt's statement marks the first explicit, documented articulation of a racial priesthood restriction within the Mormon movement, suggesting that the formalization of the policy was emerging under Brigham Young's administration during the westward migration. Historians note that this pronouncement reflects both the racial attitudes of mid-19th century America and the consolidation of centralized control in the LDS Church, where exclusionary doctrines were increasingly codified as church policy. In September 1847, Whitmer was sustained as prophet, seer, and revelator, titles that positioned him as the rightful spiritual successor to Joseph Smith in the eyes of the group's adherents. His affiliation illustrates both the fracturing of the early Mormon movement and the enduring authority Whitmer's witness status held among dissidents seeking to legitimize their break from Brigham Young's leadership. By 1847, none of the surviving 11 official witnesses to the Book of Mormon, the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses, remained affiliated with the main body of the LDS Church led by Brigham Young. These men, whose signed testimonies had been printed in every edition of the Book of Mormon since its first publication in 1830, had all either been excommunicated, voluntarily withdrawn, or aligned with rival factions during earlier schisms. Their departures stemmed from a combination of personal disputes with Joseph Smith, opposition to doctrinal and organizational changes in Nauvoo, and rejection of Brigham Young's authority after Smith's death. While several, including David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery, continued to affirm their belief in the divine origin of the Book of Mormon. Their absence from the Utah-bound church highlights the deep divisions and ongoing fragmentation of the early Mormon movement less than 2 decades after its founding. This reality also undercuts later LDS portrayals of early unity among the book's key witnesses. On July 24, 1847, Brigham Young entered the Salt Lake Valley, marking the symbolic culmination of the Mormon migration west. Young, who had been delayed by illness, arrived 2 days after the initial vanguard company led by Orson Pratt. The entry into the valley followed months of travel across the plains from Winter Quarters, Nebraska, during which the migrating Latter-day Saints moved in regimented companies under detailed organizational rules outlined in Young's January 1847 revelation. The choice of the Salt Lake Valley was strategic. It lay in the Mexican-controlled territory of Alta California at the time, placing the community beyond direct U.S. legal jurisdiction, and offered relative isolation where Young could establish a tightly controlled, self-sufficient theocratic settlement. This arrival marked the beginning of permanent Mormon colonization in the Great Basin, initiating a new phase of centralized leadership under Young and laying the groundwork for both rapid expansion and renewed conflict with outside powers in the years ahead. I hope you learned something new. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and follow for more no-fluff ex-Mormon content that cuts through the faith-promoting fog. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.